Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Manpreet Dillon, and I'm really excited to be here with Diego today as we talk about LGBTQ in Europe and international organizations. So just starting off, I do want to acknowledge I'm calling in from the ancestral lands and the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. And I'm really grateful to always be calling in from these lands, given my family came as immigrants, and we call in from like the energy from the ancestors from this lands and my family's lands from Punjab as well. And it's always powerful to be supported by our ancestors as we do this work in this decolonization and work in the world. And then one of the things that you will notice today, we say LGBTQ um, rather than the 2S LGBTQIA2 plus, not because we are talking in the European and international context, and that we don't use 2S in context outside of North America. Actually, 2S is actually, seated in from Winnipeg, starts from Winnipeg itself, two-spirited. And so we are going to say LGBTQ, but it is encompassing for the entire community, and just want to be acknowledging of that as well. So I'm so excited to have Diego here. So Diego, first of all, thank you so much for taking your time and being here. And I know that I'm really excited to out you for our conversation. I was really excited when you actually reached out, because it's always neat to meet people who are doing this work in different parts of the world. And I know you're based in Spain, but then also your perspectives and the way that you approach this work and how the experiences that you're going to bring. Because for me, I'm interested in a conversation, because working with international organizations, we come across constantly about how we bring up this topic of LGBTQ in the workplace when we have conflicting legislations and governments supporting the organizations. And some of those organizations don't want to talk about the topic. They actually don't want to see LGBTQ in any of the documents because their countries don't support it. The countries actually have legislation against same-sex relationships. So I know that's my, kind of like agenda for today, about like diving into how do we navigate these conversations. But starting off, would love to hear about you and to tell me a little bit more about yourself.
Great. Thank you, Manpreet. Thank you for having me. And yeah, thank you all for connecting today. So yeah, my name is Diego. I'm Swiss and Spanish, so born and raised in Switzerland, but I come from a Spanish background family. Now I'm based in Madrid in Spain. And yeah, I mean this topic is my life, because I'm LGBT. I'm a gay man. And as a kid, I didn't have many representations, role models to follow. I was always very, very lonely, let's say, in my background, in my family, in my groups of friends always. And it's only as I turned 18 and I left my hometown that I was able to meet more people like me, let's say, from the same community. And because of that, I've always been very aware of what it feels to belong to a minority. And as I started working, I've been working in several company sizes, different sectors, always in human resources. But I always felt like something was missing within companies. I always thought that it was a shame that people had to hide their identity, their sexual orientation or gender identity. And for me, it was quite difficult, because as I did all this work of trying to understand myself and come out and feel comfortable with myself in my private life, as soon as I started working, I kind of went back to the closet and went back to hiding a part of myself, which was quite important. And it took me some time to also get used to talking about it in the workplace. And I think it's still very much taboo in a lot of cultures, a lot of companies. And that's why I've tried and do my own project. I've decided to launch my own business consulting firm to help companies accompany them through this transition, through this process of implementing the right strategy to include LGBT people and to make them feel comfortable and respected at work.
That's awesome. And so if you were like to tell me about what is your vision for like what workplaces, how your work can impact workplaces, what is that vision for you?
Mm-hmm. I mean, The vision is obviously to make everyone feel comfortable at work. I mean, going to work should not be about, you know, creating a persona or a different character, you know. When you go to work, you should be able to be yourself 100%, in order to also bring the best of yourself. Because I strongly believe that if you're not 100% yourself, you cannot thrive. People cannot get to know you. You cannot connect in the same way with your colleagues, with your managers. And at the end of the day, it's going to affect you. I mean, not only personally, because it's actually very tiring to hide a part of yourself, but also professionally, because you're not going to be able to develop and to grow within the company to get, you know, the promotion you want, and to be valued for who you are, really. So my vision would be to really create a workplace where everyone feels comfortable, and where also the company feels comfortable, because they have the right policies, the right strategy and communication throughout the company. So it's not only about doing a one-time event, you know, to about awareness during Pride Month, but it's really throughout the year to have a global strategy that impacts all the different areas of the business.
No, I appreciate that. Sorry, I'm like trying not to cough at the same time because I've been sick the last couple of days. You said something really interesting about being tired because you're putting on a, like, you didn't use the word mask, but you said characters. And that's really interesting because even as a woman of color, that's actually part of the thing. Like you kind of you co-change, right? Like you're like, well, how can I show up? Like who do I need to be in order to show in the workplace? So growing up, how often did you have to do that in the communities that you lived in and in the workplaces where you just felt like you're code switching constantly about and trying to understand who you needed to be for someone else instead of who you needed to be for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, growing up LGBT, I think we all went through the same kind of dilemma and struggle of, you know, first understanding who we are, then coming to terms with it, accepting it, understanding it, and then being strong enough to say it out loud, to be ourselves, and not being scared of what other people would say or how they would treat us. But yeah, I mean, obviously as a teenager, it took me some time to come out of the closet. I was lucky enough not to be bullied at school compared to a lot of my LGBT friends. I wasn't bullied, but also I did hide a lot from my personality, from who I was. So I had a personality that was very closed. You know, I didn't talk much because of that, because I felt like you know, if I talked a lot or if I was too much myself, you know, the people would see who I really was. And so I had that during my teenage years, and then as I studied, and then I felt better about myself and came out, and everything was fine. But then as soon as I started working, I had my first corporate job, you know, when I was around 24. Then I had to go back to the closet, and it took me maybe 2 or 3 years to really feel comfortable to say it and to express it in the workplace, and it's proven actually that younger people tend to hide it more than people that are more senior within companies, the fact they're LGBT, because when you start working, the first thing you do is analyzing the context in which you are, see if it's, you know, safe or not safe, and then based on that, based on the company culture, also the policies that are implemented, what you are told during the onboarding process in the company, then based on that you decide to either say it or not say it. So that's why it's also really important for the company to implement these initiatives and to communicate it to their employees, so that people know what kind of company they're working for, and if it's a safe environment to say it. It should always be the company doing the first step, and then the people coming out and sharing their identity. It shouldn't be the other way around.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, sorry for having to go off video when I'm coughing, but anyways,
No worries.
no, I think that's like such an important thing because I have so many questions, and some of this I'm going to say as a straight woman, right? So I'm thinking about this because I know even when we, as a person living with disabilities, they have similar conversations in their brain. So at the time when they're like, should I declare? Do I not declare? Do I ask for accommodations? Do I because as a woman of color, it's very visible who we are.
Yeah.
It's like if you if it's not visible, then it's like that conversation is such a important thing about how do you negotiate that within yourself. So how do you guide other people to have that conversation within themselves? Like, what are some of the elements that what are things some of the things that organization can do to create safety so people can come out? Like I know that you said policies and stuff, but do you have any like concrete examples of like what that could be?
Course. Yeah, I mean, just to mention what you just said about the being that being LGBT is an invisible diversity. Let's say it is true. It's a very specific. I would say it's being LGBT is a very specific type of diversity.
Yeah.
First, because it's very controversial, compared to other types of diversity like gender inclusion, disability, cultural diversity, age, or neurodiversity. Being LGBT is first very political, so it's some very sensitive sometimes to talk about this in companies, and it's also an invisible diversity. So you don't necessarily see that someone is LGBT. Some people might argue the opposite, obviously, but most of the time you cannot tell if someone is LGBT. So it's really up to the person who's LGBT to say it or not say it, to share it or not share it. But in order to create an environment which is inclusive for everyone and a safe space so people can come out, first of all, I mean, it starts, I worked in HR, so I always work with the employee life cycle, right? From the beginning, the employee talks to your company. From the moment they look at your website, it should be clear that you're an inclusive employer, right? So you should start with your communication on your website, on your social media, about your values, your vision, about the recruitment process. So mentioning also that during the recruitment process, you will be using inclusive procedures and interview practices. So it's also, in the way that you ask your questions during the interview, in the way that you address someone by their pronouns, for example, once they tell you their pronouns. And then during the onboarding, obviously the onboarding and their first week and first days of the employee in the company, it's also about telling them these are the values that we have as a company. We don't tolerate any discrimination, and if you suffer any discrimination, here is the number, here is the person that you need to reach out to, and the safe space that you have here that you can reach out to in case you suffer any discrimination. And obviously also the opposite, in case you discriminate someone, here are also the rules, and here are the sanctions that you might get if you discriminate someone. It's really important to communicate that, because it's true that a lot of companies have initiatives and are willing to include people, but they don't communicate it. Also, many times they don't communicate it to internally or externally. So it's really important that people know what the company is really standing for and what initiatives they have. So this is very important, communication. Obviously, training all your employees, and especially the people that are, for example, front of house staff. So if you have staff that is talking to clients, for example, in a shop, it's really important to train them on what is being LGBT, and obviously train people in human resources that are going to be the ones who are going to be selecting the talent, selecting the employees, so that they don't have a bias when they recruit. And because it happens a lot in recruitment that we have these biases, and we tend to recruit people that are very similar to us, so it's really important to try to break that and to recruit sometimes people that we might not be as familiar with, because they also bring diversity and they bring new ideas to the business. So really important.
With that, like, I mean, I think one of the things is, because that's all great. And then as we talked about the international organizations, right? Mm-hmm. We have, I know that's where we were kind of discussing the difference. When, with these international organizations, because you have people from all these different cultures, everyone has a different lens on their relationship with LGBTQ community, based on culture, political sensitivities, as you mentioned, whatever else, the biases that they live with. How do you feel like, so as an organization, how do we navigate that? And as an individual, how do you navigate that if you're part of the community as well?
Yeah, I mean, as an organization, I think you first need to know, well, which country you're based in. Obviously, you need to know what are the laws in the country you're based. So obviously you need to adapt to that, but you also need to know what diversity you have within your company. So as you mentioned, there's a lot of companies that have international corporations, especially that have people from very different cultures, different ethnicities, religions, beliefs, etc. And it's really important to take this into account so that when you implement an initiative, a diversity and inclusion initiative specifically for the LGBT community, you need to explain. I think you need to really explain that this is not a political stance. This is actually human rights. I mean, by the way, the UN, the United Nations in 2017, they specified that LGBT people are a group which is at risk of discrimination, similar to groups, for example, as immigrants or children. So the UN drafted something called the UN Standard of Conduct, which is a charter basically that companies can follow to try and avoid discrimination and to improve the inclusion of LGBT people in society. So that's not, and the UN is not doing this from a political standpoint. They're doing it because it's part, they consider that it's human rights, right? So for me, it's also common sense. I mean, you shouldn't discriminate someone for who they are, you know? Being LGBT is not a choice. I mean, I guess it's common sense, but it's sometimes good to repeat it. Being LGBT is not a choice. You don't choose to be LGBT. It's who you are. So you cannot discriminate someone for who they are. And as I mentioned, the UN, it drafted these guidelines for companies so that companies know that, you know, they have to follow those rules, even if they don't necessarily agree to everything. And what I would tell people is that a lot of times I get asked this question: why should we talk about this topic at work? Why is it relevant? Why can't people just keep it in their private life? And I like to distinguish between personal life and private life. You know, everyone has a private life. It's all these things that you do in your private time, your own time, and that obviously you're not going to share at work. You know, there's some things that you do with your partner in your privacy that you're not going to share, but there's also a lot of other things which are part of your personal life that we tend to share, that most people share when they're at work, you know, about, you know, if they got married, if they've got kids, which bar they went to during the weekend. I'm not saying that, you know, everyone has to share everything about their personal life, but, you know, it's very normal when you go to work on a Monday morning to ask your colleagues, oh, you know, well, how was your weekend? What did you do? And the normal thing is to just share, you know, I've been in this bar, or I just got married. I'm very happy I just got married, or I just adopted a kid. And these are things that most LGBT people are still scared of sharing at work, because they're scared of being treated differently, of being discriminated. And I would say that it's very important for people to understand that there's a personal life and a private life, and everyone should be able to share their personal life without having to lie about it. And every corporation should also respect everyone, no matter the differences. I'm not saying that you should treat people better than others. I think you should treat just everyone with respect, and that's all we're asking for.
No, and I really, really appreciate you saying that, because I think for people who do sometimes still are challenged with that, like ask themselves that question, because I hear it all the time. Actually, it's not, they're like, well, why should it matter? Like they're doing what they're doing. But it's also, but it is about the people want to be able to share their personal life, and I think it's such an important piece. You know, with that, it also comes back to like making it like, you know, when sometimes people just assume it's someone's partner, or they'll like make those comments. If someone doesn't know, you know, you just assume they are in a, you know, whatever relationship, and you might be assuming who their partner might be. And that's also this constant, like, it always kind of, for me, it kind of feels like you're cutting someone with a razor, and you constantly like, they're having to just take it. And at some point they're going to be like, I can't take this anymore, because and that's what it kind of feels like. There's a cut by like 1,000, you know, no, the wound by 1,000 cuts, or whatever
it's what we call like microaggressions, right? These micro little you know, like mosquito bites, you know, when they bite you once, it doesn't matter, but when they ask you constantly, you know, oh, where's your girlfriend, or when are you getting married, or or who's the man and who's the woman in the relationship,
Yeah.
or all these typical comments, that you get every day or almost every day. It starts becoming very, very tiring in the long run.
Yeah, completely. And and you want like the image I always get is like with any microaggression, it's like you take it, either you build a big like a big wall and you're just like, okay, well, there's just like this huge wall. Otherwise, you just kind of go into a shell and you're just like, but either way, it's not healthy because it's not healthy for the individual, because it's damaging in so many different ways as well, right?
Sure, not for sure. I mean, and it's particularly difficult for younger people, I think, because for me now, I'm older. I've been out of the closet for 15 years, so I've kind of gotten used to it, and I know how to react in different types of situations, and I feel much more confident about myself, so I don't take things so personally. But when you're younger, you don't have so much self-confidence, for example. You will take everything much more personally, and it will be much more difficult for people to stand their ground and to open up or to defend themselves. And that's what happens many times with discrimination in the workplace, is that many times discrimination is not as obvious maybe as 20-30 years ago. It's maybe through a comment, through a joke, through a really bad, yeah, very bad joke very often, and a lot of people don't know how to react. People who are victims of that discrimination, they don't know how to react because they don't know if it's really a joke or not, and they don't want to create a fuss, and maybe they don't have this self-confidence to stand for themselves. And then people who are seeing the discrimination happening, colleagues or managers that are in the room, don't know either how to react or how to distinguish between a joke and a discrimination. And that's also where it's very important for the companies to set what is a discrimination, what is allowed or not allowed. And these kind of jokes shouldn't be allowed.
Yeah, completely. It's curious. I'm just thinking about, I have a few, there've been colleagues, friends, that have come out later in life, and many of them actually decided to leave the jobs that they came out in. Like, so they would come out and then they decided to just leave the job after a while because it was too hard to have, for them, for each, there was just a case of like 4 of them. For each of them, the case was like keeping into their claimed identity, like of like reclaiming their own identity, and still being in the old environment was too hard for them. And so, do you have any, like, when we're working with that, is there anything that the organization can do to help, people? I mean, this happens. So many people go through transition, people like just in transition in life, like not just not through gender transition, but just they go through the grieving process, or there's like when they have loss or anything, or when they are coming out. So when these major transitions happen in people's lives, what can organizations do to support that? So, and what can colleagues do to support individuals as they are coming out, or as they are kind of to help them feel inclusive so that they may not have to leave the organization. I say this because we actually worked with clients. The person was doing it, they were doing a gender transition, and we ended up doing a workshop for the organization, and the organization didn't know that they were doing a gender transition at the time. And during the workshop, they're like, I'm so glad this workshop's happening because we were actually going through the transition. They're like, I thought I just had to leave afterwards. I didn't realize I could actually stay here. And it was this moment like where the organization was like, oh no, like we don't want you to leave. And the colleagues were like, we don't want you to leave. And it just ended up having this really powerful, beautiful conversation around it. But their whole thing was, right before the transition was like their surgery was going to happen, they were going to just quit their job and go get a new job.
Yeah, it's crazy. I think, I mean, obviously training is the number one step. I mean, you should train everyone on these topics so people know how to approach the topic. They know what kind of questions they can ask or not ask. They know how to support someone. Obviously, I think the best way to help someone is just to be there, right? To listen, to support, to help, if they need any support with their, medical appointments, if they need someone to accompany them, or if they need someone to support them while they're on sick leave. But I think it's just really important to have this ability to open up, to have a safe space. So having a company where there is a safe space. A lot of companies have, for example, LGBT groups, employee resource groups, which are good because they're kind of a safe space where people can be themselves, because sometimes the human resources department people tend to perceive the HR team as very linked to the management team, and sometimes they're a bit scared to share something with the HR team because they think that maybe they will tell this information to someone else. Whereas having an employee resource group for LGBT people and allies, I think it's a great way to have a safe space where, in case of discrimination, in case someone is going through, their transition, or they've just been diagnosed with HIV, for example, that happens sometimes, have a safe space where people can go, and they know that this safe space within the company is not tied to either the manager or the HR team or the management team. It's just a team of people that care about this topic, and that will not impact their professional career, for example. That's what happens. The fear, let's say, of being impacted in their careers. And I think if these people, your friends, if they wanted to leave, after doing the transition, it's probably because the company hadn't created the right environment, or at least they didn't feel safe enough to be themselves truly. So,
Well, they just came out, like they weren't even like these were just colleagues that just came out later on in life. They didn't, but they still felt like they couldn't stay, because it also didn't feel like they're like, that was my old identity, and this is not, like, that's the identity that they didn't want to be that part of themselves anymore, like.
Yeah, I get that too.
Yeah.
It's also part of the process. I think it's difficult when you are in an environment which used to perceive you in a way, and now you're different, you've changed, you've evolved. It happens with friendships as well. Sometimes you just feel after some years that you need new friendships because you're a new person. Your identity has evolved or changed. It does happen, but I think it's also good sometimes to stay in those companies to actually to be the change, right? To be that change that you want to see in the world, and to be able to be that advocate that you always wish you had. It is not the easiest way. It is difficult, obviously, to be the only person, leading the way in an organization. But I think it's the right way for younger generations. I mean, if we look at the statistics in the US, there's a new study from the US saying that around 17% of the US population identifies as LGBT. I mean, part of the Gen Z, the younger generation, the ones who are under 25. So it is a reality, and more people are feeling comfortable to
Owning
say
it. Yeah. Exactly. No, thank you so much. So where can people find you?
People can find me on LinkedIn. So my name is Diego Lazaro, and the company is called Be Diverse LGBT Corporate Trainings. So you can find me either on LinkedIn or on our website, so bediversetrainings.com.
Okay, well, thank you so much for being here today, and for the conversation.
Thank you so much, Manpreet.